St. Jude's Hospital is a labyrinth of glass, white tile, and secrets. Tonight, the air in the East Wing is heavy with the kind of silence that usually precedes a storm. It is a silence currently being watched by Julian Cross. Standing behind the reinforced glass of a private suite, his eyes are as cold and unblinking as a winter sea. He isn't here for medical care, and he isn't here to socialize. He is here because he owns the very ground this hospital stands on, and right now, his eyes are fixed on the hallway below. Anessa Cole stands in that hallway, a vision of quiet competence in her crisp white scrubs. Her hair is woven into neat, professional braids, reflecting the order she brings to the chaos of her ward. She is the one who remembers the charts others forget, the one who keeps the machinery of healing moving when the gods in suits are too busy calculating profits. She doesn't hear the heavy, expensive tread of Dr. Marcus Hale. He is a man who wears a navy suit like a weapon and authority like a crown he never earned. He approaches her not with a question, but with an invasion. When she doesn't immediately yield to his demands, he does the unthinkable. His hand snaps out, fingers like iron claws, and he grabs her upper arm with a brutal, invasive force that makes her flinch in pain. In the sterile brightness of the hallway, the violation is absolute. He leans in, his face a mask of corporate rage, whispering threats into her space while the world continues to walk past, too afraid to look. But Julian Cross is looking. From his glass tower, he watches the bruises form on Anessa's skin. His jaw locks, and a dangerous stillness settles over him. Marcus Hale thinks he is the most powerful man in this hallway, but he is about to realize he is being watched by the man who can end his career with a single phone call. Who is Julian Cross? Why is he protecting a nurse he's never met? And what happens when the glass between them finally shatters? Stay tuned, because this isn't just a workplace dispute, it's the beginning of a total war. Welcome to a story of power, betrayal, and the witness who changed everything. St. Jude's Hospital lived by a rhythm that most people only noticed when it skipped a beat, but Anessa Cole was the one who ensured the heart of the East Wing never faltered. To the surgeons, she was a fixture of the hallway, as reliable and overlooked as the automated hand sanitizer dispensers or the industrial tile beneath their feet. She was the hallway standard, the benchmark of invisible efficiency. At 3:00 a.m., when the adrenaline of the swing shift had soured into the bone-deep exhaustion of the graveyard hours, Anessa was at her peak. Her white scrubs remained miraculously unwrinkled, a stark contrast to the harried, coffee-stained uniforms of the residents scuttling past her. She moved with a silent, athletic grace, her braided hair reflecting the sterile overhead lights like armor. She knew which patient in room 412 would need extra pillows before they even pressed the call button. She knew that the digital readout on the telemetry monitor in the hallway was lagging by 3 seconds, and she had already called maintenance twice to fix it. Most importantly, she knew the temperaments of the men in navy suits who ran the hospital like a private fiefdom. For years, Anessa had mastered the art of being essential yet invisible. She was the buffer between the high-strung egos of the executive floor and the vulnerable reality of the patients. When a budget report was delayed, or a surgical suite wasn't prepped to a perfectionist's liking, it was Anessa who smoothed the jagged edges of the administration's temper. She had learned to swallow and smile, a survival mechanism she'd honed until it felt like a second skin. She believed that her silence was her strength, that if she remained the perfect, professional machine, she would be untouchable. She didn't realize that to men like Dr. Marcus Hale, invisibility wasn't a shield, it was an invitation. To him, the hallway standard wasn't a person to be respected, but a tool to be used and eventually broken. On this particular night, as she stood adjusting a cart of supplies, the air pressure in the hallway seemed to drop. The usual hum of the hospital faded into a pressurized vacuum. Anessa felt the familiar, cold prickle of intuition on the back of her neck. She was alone in the corridor, or so she thought. She didn't see the figure watching from the darkened suite above, nor did she hear the swift, predatory stride of the man approaching from behind. She was simply doing her job, unaware that the quiet life she had built on the foundation of being overlooked was about to be shattered by a single, violent reach for control. The transition from professional order to primal aggression happened in the space of a single breath. The rhythmic squeak of a medication cart down a distant hall was suddenly cut short by the sharp, metallic snap of expensive wingtips striking the linoleum. Dr. Marcus Hale didn't walk into a room. He annexed it. Tonight, the crisp lines of his navy suit seemed to vibrate with a volatile energy that even the hospital's heavy air couldn't dampen. Anessa was finalizing the inventory log when his shadow fell over her, cold and heavy. She didn't need to look up to recognize the scent of sandalwood and unbridled ego. The Q3 budget reconciliations for the East Wing, Anessa, Hale started, his voice a low, dangerous grate. They were due on my desk an hour ago. Instead, I find you playing librarian with a supply cart. Anessa straightened her back, keeping her voice even, a practiced shield of professional calm. Dr. Hale, the trauma unit had 3 incoming emergencies. I prioritized the patient stabilization reports as per protocol. The budget figures are. I don't pay you to prioritize, Hale interrupted, stepping into her personal space. The god complex that usually manifested as cold arrogance was curdling into something far more physical. I pay you to follow the directions of this administration. You've become comfortable, Anessa. You think your tenure here makes you indispensable. You think you can ignore me. Anessa felt the heat radiating from him, a sharp contrast to the air-conditioned chill of the hallway. She looked him in the eye, a move he clearly considered an act of war. I am following hospital policy, doctor. If you'd like to discuss the hierarchy of care, we can do so in the morning with the board. The mention of the board was the final crack in his polished mask. The man who appeared on the covers of medical journals vanished, replaced by a predator who felt his territory threatened. His face contorted, his jaw locking with such force the tendons in his neck stood out like cables. You don't threaten me, he hissed. Before she could retreat, his hand shot out, a blur of navy wool and sudden violence. He didn't just grab her, he claimed her. His fingers sank into the soft flesh of her upper arm, his grip so sudden and invasive that the air left Anessa's lungs in a silent gasp. He yanked her toward him, forcing her off balance, his face inches from hers. The pain was immediate, a sharp, throbbing heat that promised a bruise by morning. In that moment, the hallway felt miles long and completely empty. Anessa went still, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird, her eyes wide with the shock of the violation. She looked for a witness, for anyone to break the spell of his entitled rage, but the corridor remained a vacuum of white light. Hale didn't notice the silent figure standing behind the glass of the observation suite above. He didn't see Julian Cross's fingers curl slowly into a white-knuckled fist. Hale thought he was alone with his victim. He was wrong. He had just committed the one mistake his corporate shield couldn't protect him from. He had provided a witness with a reason to destroy him. The morning sun filtered through the blinds of the Human Resources office, but it brought no warmth. Anessa sat on a low-slung leather chair, her left arm throbbing beneath the sleeve of her fresh scrubs. Each pulse of pain was a reminder of the night before, a rhythmic echo of Dr. Hale's grip. Across from her sat Linda Vance, the director of personnel, whose smile was as polished and synthetic as the laminate desk between them. Anessa, dear, let's be realistic, Linda began, her voice a soothing lilt that didn't reach her eyes. We've reviewed the logs. You were behind on your administrative duties, and Dr. Hale was under immense pressure regarding the surgical expansion. It was a high-stress environment. Things get heated. Anessa felt a cold stone settle in her stomach. He didn't just get heated, Linda. He assaulted me. He grabbed me hard enough to leave marks. I've already had the clinic document the bruising. Linda's smile didn't flicker, but her posture shifted, becoming terrifyingly rigid. She leaned forward, sliding a thin manila folder across the desk. What I see here is a report of insubordination. I see a history of you being difficult with leadership when asked to prioritize corporate efficiency. Dr. Hale is a cornerstone of St. Jude. His reputation is what keeps this wing funded. You, on the other hand, are a replaceable component of the nursing staff. The air in the room felt thin. Anessa realized then that she wasn't in a meeting. She was in a deposition for a crime they were already erasing. The hallway cameras, Anessa said, her voice trembling but clear. Just look at the footage from 3:14 a.m. It's all there. Linda sighed, a sound of feigned pity. There was a scheduled server maintenance during that window, Anessa. A technical glitch. There is no footage. It's your word against a man who has brought $10 million in grants to this hospital this year alone. Linda opened the folder to reveal a single sheet of paper, a non-disclosure agreement and a voluntary resignation. Sign this, and we'll provide a neutral reference. Refuse, and we will terminate you for cause. You'll never work in a magnet hospital again. You have to ask yourself, is one moment of discomfort worth your entire career? Anessa looked at the paper, then at the predatory stillness in Linda's face. She felt the crushing weight of the corporate shield, a machine designed to grind women like her into dust to keep the gears of the elite turning. For the first time in her life, the hallway standard felt like a death sentence. She was being told she was invisible, that her pain didn't exist, and that the man who hurt her was untouchable. She reached for the pen, her hand shaking, truly believing she was alone in the dark. She didn't know that miles away, in a penthouse made of steel and glass, Julian Cross was already making the call that would set the machine on fire. The walk to the parking garage felt like a funeral procession for a life Anessa had spent a decade building. The threat from HR hung in the stagnant air, a cold promise of professional exile. She reached her car, her fingers trembling as she fumbled for her keys, but she stopped dead when she saw it. Tucked under her windshield wiper was a heavy, cream-colored envelope. There was no stamp, no address, just her name written in a precise, commanding hand. Inside was a single business card, matte black with silver embossing, Cross Industries. On the back, a handwritten message. The camera was off, but I wasn't. Meet me at the address below. 2 hours later, Anessa stood in the lobby of a skyscraper that felt more like a fortress of glass and steel. She was whisked upward in a silent elevator to a penthouse office where the city of St. Jude looked like a miniature toy set below. Behind a desk carved from a single slab of obsidian sat Julian Cross. He didn't rise, but the gravity in the room shifted toward him the moment she entered. He looked exactly as he had behind the glass, controlled, observant, and dangerously calm. "You're late, Miss Cole," he said, his voice a low resonance that seemed to vibrate in the floorboards. "But considering the morning you've had with Linda Vance, it's understandable." Anessa remained by the door, her hand instinctively covering the bruise on her arm. "How do you know about Linda? Who are you?" Julian stood then, his tall frame cutting a sharp silhouette against the floor-to-ceiling windows. "I am the man who was in the trauma suite last night. I was there to oversee the installation of a new neurological wing I'm funding. I saw Dr. Hale lose his mind, and I saw him put his hands on you." He walked toward her, stopping just outside her personal space. His eyes dropped to her arm. "They told you the footage was deleted, didn't they? A technical glitch." Anessa nodded, a lump forming in her throat. "They said it's my word against his. They said I'm disposable." A thin, cold smile touched Julian's lips, the look of a man who had already won a war the enemy didn't know had started. He reached into his blazer and pulled out a sleek, titanium smartphone. He tapped the screen and turned it toward her. There, in high-definition clarity, was the hallway. The video wasn't from a hospital security feed. It was a vantage point from the suite, captured by his private security detail. It showed the entire assault, Hale's snarling face, the violent yank of her arm, and the way Anessa's body had jolted in pain. "St. Jude's thinks they own the narrative because they own the servers," Julian whispered, his gaze locking onto hers with a terrifying intensity. "But they don't own me, and they don't know that I've been looking for a reason to prune the rot out of that hospital board for years. You are the catalyst, Anessa. You aren't disposable. You're the most dangerous person in Dr. Hale's life. You just didn't have a weapon until now." The high-definition playback on the smartphone screen was a silent, damning loop of the previous night's cruelty. Anessa watched her own body stumble under Hale's grip, seeing the moment her dignity was physically snatched away. It was one thing to feel the pain. It was another to see the clinical, objective proof that she wasn't crazy, and that the god of St. Jude's was merely a common bully in an expensive suit. Julian Cross reclaimed the device, his thumbs sliding over the titanium casing. He didn't offer her a tissue or a sympathetic pat on the shoulder. He offered her something much rarer in the halls of St. Jude: the truth. The hospital is a business, Ms. Cole, and in business, the loudest voice usually belongs to the one with the biggest checkbook. Marcus Hale believes he is the checkbook. He believes that because he brings in $10 million a year, the board will let him break as many nurses as he needs to keep the numbers up. He walked back to the obsidian desk and picked up a heavy, translucent tablet. But I have spent the last decade building an empire that dwarfs his petty hospital politics. To me, Dr. Hale is a rounding error. To the board, I am the man who could pull the funding for their new oncology wing with a single text message. Anessa looked at him, the weight of the power in the room making the air feel thick. What do you want from me, Mr. Cross? Why show me this if you could just give the video to the police? Because the police can be bought, and HR has already shown you they've picked a side, Julian said, his voice dropping into a register that was both terrifying and seductive. If we just hand this over, the hospital's legal team will bury you in motions for years. They'll attack your character, they'll dig into your past, and they'll make sure you never see a penny or an apology. No, Anessa, we aren't going to just file a report. We're going to apply a different kind of medicine. He leaned over the desk, his eyes locking onto hers with a predatory focus. I'm offering you my legal team. I'm offering you my private investigators. I'm offering you a seat at a table they didn't even know existed. We aren't going to ask for justice. We are going to architect it. I want to see the look on Hale's face when he realizes that the woman he thought was a replaceable component is actually the one holding the match that will burn his kingdom to the ground. Anessa looked down at her arm, where the bruise was turning a dark, angry purple. For the first time since the hallway, she didn't feel like a victim waiting for a verdict. She felt like a soldier being handed a rifle. "What's the first step?" she whispered. Julian's smile was cold, sharp, and entirely final. The first step is letting them think they've won. Let them think you're scared. Let them think the hallway standard has finally been broken. We need them comfortable, because a man who thinks he's untouchable is a man who stops looking behind him. In the subterranean quiet of Cross Industries' security wing, the air hummed with the electric thrum of servers processing decades of data. Julian didn't just employ lawyers. He employed digital surgeons who could cut through corporate firewalls like they were paper. As Anessa watched, 3 massive monitors flickered to life, bathing the room in a clinical, pale blue glow. "Everyone has a pattern, Anessa," Julian said, his voice echoing in the sparse room. "Marcus Hale isn't a man who suddenly lost his temper last night. He is a man who has been allowed to be a monster because he is profitable." A lead investigator, a woman with eyes as sharp as glass, tapped a key. A waterfall of redacted documents and internal memos began to cascade down the screen. They weren't just looking at the hospital's official records. They were looking at the ghost files, the complaints that HR had officially classified as resolved or unsubstantiated. There was a surgical resident from 5 years ago who had suddenly transferred to a rural clinic after a disagreement with Hale. There was an anesthesiologist whose career had ended in a flurry of malpractice allegations shortly after she filed a grievance about Hale's physical conduct in the operating theater. Name after name, face after face appeared, women and younger men who had been squeezed out, paid off, or threatened into silence. "Look at the dates," Julian pointed out, his finger tracing a line on the screen. "Every time he's about to be promoted, a complaint disappears. The hospital doesn't just protect him, they curate him. They've spent hundreds of thousands of dollars in private settlements just to keep his legend intact." Anessa felt a wave of nausea. She saw a scanned copy of a handwritten letter from a former nurse describing a crushing grip on the shoulder during a night shift, the exact same predatory physicality she had experienced. The letter was stamped with the word void in thick, red ink. "I wasn't the first," Anessa whispered, the weight of the collective silence hitting her harder than Hale's hand ever could. "No," Julian replied, his shadow lengthening against the digital display. "But you are the first one who stayed in the room after he left. Hale thinks he's built a fortress out of these buried lives. He doesn't realize that he's actually built a mountain of dry tinder." He turned to his team, his expression shifting into something lethal. Dig deeper. I want the bank records of the board members who signed those settlements. I want to know who authorized the deletion of the hallway footage. If Hale is the monster, I want the names of the people who have been feeding him. As the screens continued to flash with the wreckage of ruined careers, Anessa realized the hallway standard wasn't just about her. It was about an entire machine that relied on people like her being too afraid to look up. But looking at Julian, she knew the time for looking down was over. The ghosts in the machine were finally being given a voice. The safe house was a neutral-toned apartment in a part of the city where the streetlights actually worked, a far cry from the flickering tubes of the East Wing. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of chamomile tea and a decade of suppressed trauma. Julian sat in the corner, a silent shadow of protection, while Anessa sat across from Sarah and Alina, two women who had once worn the same white scrubs, but now wore the haunted expressions of those who had been forced to vanish. "They told me I was the only one," Sarah whispered, her hands trembling around her mug. She had been a head nurse before Hale's disciplinary action stripped her of her license 5 years ago. "They said if I spoke up, the hospital would sue me for every penny I'd ever earn. They made me feel like I was a glitch in an otherwise perfect system." Anessa reached across the table, her own bruise now a fatting yellow, but the phantom heat of the grab felt fresh. "He didn't just touch me, Sarah. He claimed me. Like I was equipment he could toss aside when I didn't work the way he wanted." One by one, the stories spilled out, the accidental collisions in the supply closets, the crushing grips on shoulders, the whispered threats disguised as professional feedback. These were the women the ghost in the machine had revealed, but seeing them in the flesh was different. They weren't just data points, they were a sisterhood of the silenced. "Julian's lawyers say the NDAs are paper shields," Anessa said, her voice growing stronger as she looked from Sarah to Alina. "A contract signed under duress to cover up a crime is no contract at all. We've spent years thinking we were alone in the dark. But when you put all our stories together, they form a spotlight so bright Marcus Hale won't have anywhere left to hide." Alina, the youngest of the group, looked at Julian and then back at Anessa. "Are you sure he can't hurt us again? He's the vice president of the board now. He has friends in every department." "He has friends," Julian's voice cut through the room, low and absolute. "But I have the receipts, and more importantly, I have the truth. He spent 10 years buying your silence because he knew that if even 2 of you stood together, his empire would collapse. Tonight, there are 4 of you." The atmosphere shifted. The fear that had defined their lives for years didn't vanish, but it transformed into a cold, focused resolve. They began to exchange contact info, dates, and names of witnesses who had been too afraid to speak back then. The hallway standard was no longer just about Anessa's survival. It was about reclaiming the ground Hale had stolen from all of them. As they stood to leave, Anessa realized that for the first time, she wasn't just a nurse keeping the chaos from collapsing. She was the architect of the storm that was about to break. The grand ballroom of the St. Jude's executive suite was a temple of mahogany and arrogance. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm, forgiving light over the hospital's elite, who stood in small circles, clinking champagne flutes and celebrating the inevitable. At the head of the room, Dr. Marcus Hale stood behind a podium, his navy suit sharp, his smile practiced and predatory. Tonight was the night he was to be officially named Senior Vice President, a promotion that would solidify his legacy and bury his sins under another layer of institutional power. "Leadership," Hale's voice boomed through the speakers, smooth as silk and twice as deceptive, "is about making the hard choices to ensure the longevity of this institution." The room erupted in polite applause, but the sound was abruptly severed by the heavy double doors at the back of the hall swinging open. The light from the corridor flooded in, silhouetting 2 figures. Anessa Cole walked in first. She wasn't in her white scrubs tonight. She wore a tailored suit of charcoal gray, her head held high, her braids intricate and regal. Beside her, Julian Cross moved with the terrifying grace of a man who had already decided the outcome of the night. The silence that followed them was absolute, a vacuum that sucked the oxygen out of the room. Hale's face paled, his grip tightening on the edges of the podium until his knuckles turned white, the same knuckles that had bruised Anessa's arm. "This is a private event," he managed, his voice cracking. "Security remove them." "Security is currently reviewing a new set of protocols, Marcus." Julian's voice resonated through the hall, calm and lethal. He didn't look at the guards. He looked directly at the board of directors. "And I believe the board would be very interested in the presentation we've prepared. It's a study on the hallway standard of conduct." Julian tapped a remote in his hand. The massive projection screen behind Hale, intended for a celebratory montage, flickered to life. There was no music, only the raw, high-definition footage of the East Wing hallway. The room gasped as they watched Hale's mask slip, seeing him snarl and violently seize Anessa's arm. But it didn't stop there. A second later, the screen split. Sarah's face appeared, then Alina, their recorded testimonies playing in a haunting chorus. They spoke of the grips, the threats, and the HR meetings where their lives were dismantled. Hale turned to the screen, his mouth hanging open, the god of St. Jude, reduced to a frantic animal. He looked at the board, but for the first time, the corporate shield didn't move to protect him. They looked at Julian, then at the footage, then at the legal firestorm standing in the center of the room. Anessa stepped forward, her voice clear and unwavering. "You told me I was a replaceable component, Marcus, but tonight, you're the only thing being replaced." Julian stepped up to the front row, leaning in toward the chairman of the board. "I am withdrawing all funding for the neurological wing effective immediately, unless the vote for this promotion is replaced by a vote for immediate termination for cause." The execution was swift. No lawyers could save him. No PR machine could spin the visual of his hand on her skin. As Hale was led out by the very security he had summoned, the room remained silent. Anessa stood where he had stood, looking out at the elite of St. Jude, no longer invisible and no longer afraid. The aftermath of the storm was not a return to the old silence, but the beginning of a new frequency at St. Jude. 6 weeks had passed since the boardroom execution, and the hospital's sterile hallways felt different, wider, brighter, and stripped of the predatory tension that had once haunted them. Marcus Hale was a ghost, his name scrubbed from the brass plaques and his medical license suspended indefinitely. But for Anessa, the transformation was far deeper than a change in staff. She stood in her new office on the executive floor, the very level she once approached with a bowed head and a cautious heart. She was no longer wearing the white scrubs of the East Wing. Today, she wore a deep emerald blazer, a color that signaled growth and grounded authority. On her desk sat a nameplate that read, Anessa Cole, Director of Ethics and Patient Advocacy. It was a position Julian Cross had insisted upon as a condition for his continued endowment. A role that ensured the hallway standard would now be a law, not just an invisible burden carried by the vulnerable. Julian stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out at the city he had helped her reclaim. He turned as she finished signing a new directive that overhauled the hospital's grievance protocols. "You look comfortable in that chair," he remarked, his voice retaining that low, dark resonance that no longer signaled a threat, but a partnership. "I'm not comfortable yet," Anessa admitted, looking at the bruise-free skin of her arm. "But for the first time, I'm not waiting for the other shoe to drop. I'm the one deciding where the shoes go." She had spent years being the backbone that kept the chaos from collapsing, the invisible force that fixed everyone else's mistakes. Now, she was the architect. Under her leadership, the HR department had been purged of its PR shields, and Sarah and Alina had been reinstated in senior consulting roles, their careers resurrected from the wreckage Hale had left behind. Julian walked over, leaning against the edge of her desk. The glass between them was gone, replaced by a complex, simmering bond forged in the heat of a shared war. "The board is terrified of you, you know. They don't know how to handle someone who actually knows what happens in the hallways at 3:00 a.m. "Good," Anessa said, a small, triumphant smile touching her lips. "They should be, because I'm not here to be a replaceable component. I'm here to make sure no one else ever is." As the sun set over the city, casting long, golden shadows across the office, Anessa realized that her journey hadn't just been about seeking justice. It was about finding the power that had always been inside her, waiting for a witness to give it room to breathe. She wasn't just a nurse anymore, and she wasn't just a survivor. She was the new foundation of St. Jude, and for the first time in her life, she was exactly where she was meant to be. The hallway was quiet now, but the silence finally belonged to her.